try and keep it on time. And some of the stories I've already told this morning, you'll get to meet one of the guys that I referenced as well. So can I get you, Shannon, just to advance the slides, and then that'll be one less job I got to worry about. And I'll just simply say next, okay? So this is me. This is 40 years of No-Till, a Canadian Journey. It's the title of the phase one of this talk that I'm going to give, and I've broken it out into 2 parts. So how can I be 40 years no-tiller? Like I said, we started no-till on our farm in 1983. I was 11 years of age. And when I went to university, basically, like I said, it was like a footnote of what no-till was. There was no discussion. One of my favorite stories at university, we had to come to a soil lab and bring soil from our own farm. And I took the soil samples and I plunked it on the counter, and I've got all this residue sticking out of the top, and all of my classmates started to laugh at me. They're like, what the hell is this mess? You know, like it sounded like a brick going on the counter. And they've got this nice pulverized loams and silts. And in the province of Ontario, we have some of the most challenging soil there is. We're very fortunate to have some really forgiving soil in the province of Ontario. The only sad part of that is I don't own any of it. Okay, so our soil type is like this floor. It's flat. It gets hard. It gets baked. It makes really good adobe to make, tile roofs and formerly clay drainage tile, right? Very, very, very high clay content. So here we go. So in 2013, 2014, I was fortunate enough that I received what's called a Nuffield Farming Scholarship. And I always jokingly said, it's too bad you guys left the king, because you guys were not able to apply for Nuffield because it was found only in the Commonwealth countries, those underneath the king. But now Nuffield scholarships are available within the United States as well. And what Nuffield means is it was originally designed for a learning opportunity for farmers. That was your only thing that you needed to be, was a farmer to apply. And so the idea is that the individual has a topic that they want to research, they apply, they go through the interview process, and the merits of their topic is evaluated against the other applicants for that year. And luckily enough, I was successful and I was chosen. I went on, my topic of study was conserving farmland with cover crops and the importance of biodiversity. And I went on to be the chairman for Nuffield Canada as well. And so I was the chair from 2019 through to a year ago. I stepped down from the board because we had some other people coming up, and I thought, well, I could remove myself to give other people the opportunity to get involved as well and lend their skills. So Nuffield has been a big part of my life and who I am, and time again, it's the reason why I've been afforded these opportunities to share my story around the world. Lord Nuffield was William Morris, born William Morris. He learned his craft. He was in the automotive space from Henry Ford. So he came over to Henry Ford, and Henry Ford showed him about the automotive assembly line. William Morris also contributed to the British war effort, right, with the Allies. And you guys might be familiar with the MG automobile. Looks like a little red roller skate, right? That's Morris Garages, is what MG stands for. William Morris was bestowed the title of Lord Nuffield due to his philanthropy by Queen Elizabeth. And him and his wife tragically didn't have any family, but he realized in order to have healthy people, you had to have healthy food. So they established these scholarship trusts that are found throughout the world now, as well as in the UK. The Nuffield brand is familiar with the health industry, healthcare, hospitals, things like that. Next slide, please. So this is home. This is where I live. So geographically, I'm in southwestern Ontario. I'm the furthest south you can get in Canada without being an American. So here's Detroit. Here's Cleveland, where this highlight is, right? Why I've got that highlighted is this is Lake Erie. And all these green masses are microcystis, blue-green algae. That's fueled primarily by what? Phosphorus and nitrogen. And where is it coming from? It's coming primarily from down here, intensive agriculture, which is Indiana, Ohio, right? Coming out of the Maumee. It's coming out of here, where I live, southwestern Ontario, again, intensive agriculture, coming down through the Thames River, emptying in right here, and I like to fish, ice fish on the river in the wintertime for walleye. Coming out of this river called the Sydenham, so those two rivers drain the largest percentage of southwestern Ontario. The lake to the north is Lake Huron, intensive agriculture up there in Ontario as well. And the Saugeen River would empty into Lake Ontario, the Maitland River, and they would come down, dumping into Lake Huron, Michigan Thumb, intensive agriculture. They would flow into what's called the St. Clair River, dumps into this little puddle lake that I'll touch upon and its impact at home on precipitation called Lake St. Clair. I like to ice fish there in the winter for yellow perch. Then that all empties in Detroit River to the shallowest end of Lake Erie, which the world's largest fishing port is right here on the edge of the square, freshwater fishing port rather, called Wheatley, Ontario, which is in my county where I live. But why this block is highlighted is because the municipal water inlet that brings water to my house where I live, where the arrow is right there in that block. When Toledo, which is down here, threw up the flag in 2011, 2013, and they were complaining about their water being in a precarious position where they couldn't make potable water for the people that inhabit Toledo, the greater Toledo area. This picture was on the front of the Detroit Free Press. And it was my brother-in-law who was screaming, "Blake, there's green paint on my lake." So he likes to windsurf, sail, do all these things, and he lives right here, right adjacent to the water inlet facility. There's a little village there called Erie Beach. And my brother-in-law, as a school teacher, he gets to spend copious hours on the beach in the summer. He's now retired. But when we're inland farming, we're not aware of what's going on in the lake. Farmers scream one thing as it pertains to change. They want to say, where is the science? Where's the science when you talk about the impact that farming's having on the landscape? Well, folks, tragically, in Lake Winnipeg, which is in the province of Manitoba, straight north of the Dakotas, they have linked blue-green microcystis, these blue-green algae masses, that whether they happen in fresh water or they happen in the Gulf, the same thing. They've linked it with DNA. And so they know the point source and they know where it's coming from. But more importantly is this lady, Dr. Susan Murch, has identified that these blue-green algae are contributing to neurological diseases in the human population. So MS, Alzheimer's, right? ALS. Sound familiar? I know a lot of us in this room, pretty much 100% of us have people that we know in our lives that are impacted by those diseases, tragically. Next slide, please. So that's what motivated me to apply, because they were telling us that the culprit in all of that were the farmers who lived on the landscape that controlled the vast percentage of the land were contributing negatively to this problem, because no-till specifically was the biggest culprit, because no-till increases earthworm numbers. And the earthworms, as they have their vertical burrows, drill down, the phosphorus is coming off the landscape, going into tile drainage, along with phosphorus, nitrogen, other micronutrients going out and perpetually fueling the problem. Well, I don't have a PhD, I don't have a master's, I don't even have a degree in agriculture. I quit my degree doing agricultural economics because supply-demand curves were not aligning with this cash crop farmer, right? And we all know the manipulation that happens at the Chicago Board of Trade, as there's all kinds of fingers in the pot. So I have a 2-year diploma in agriculture. I took those credits and was putting them towards my degree, and I got disenchanted and found myself to farming. I was in financial services, and that's sort of what fuels my brain too, about paying yourself first is the first rule of financial services. And why I recognize that in farming, in the business that we're in, a lot of us in the room, there's only one thing I can control, and that's controlling my hard costs. So that's what propels me and why I think the way I do. And so buckle up and enjoy the rest of the story. So in February 2020, I showed that first slide was 2011. February 2020, are we moving the needle? So a decade later, we can still see we've got these problems. This is the wintertime, that's why it's white. We've got all this microcystis in Lake Erie. We can see along these rivers here that come out into Lake Huron, like I said. You can just still see there's a little bit of ice cover here on Lake St. Clair where I like to fish. Next slide, please. So like I said, my study topic was conserving farmland with cover crops and the importance of biodiversity. Next slide, please. But I haven't got to this point alone, right? I always like to acknowledge that I am fortunate to have been surrounded by fantastic people that I've met on my journey. None other than this man who most of you would recognize, or some of you that don't recognize this man. This is the late, great David Brandt, the godfather of cover crops. One of the earliest adopters in this country of no-till farming practices. When I met David, his go-to for cover crop usage was a white planter, 15-inch centers. Where he was going to plant corn next year would be radish, tillage radish, and in the row middles would be Austrian winter peas. David gets introduced to, through his course of direction, he gets introduced to Jill Clapperton and Ray Archuleta from NRCS fame. And they said, David, you need to increase your diversity. So David has a field day. I met David at a field day in Ohio because I was there supporting a piece of tillage machinery that I owned, a strip till machine that was built in Minnesota called a Soil Warrior. And I must have a logo on my shirt or something on a hat. And David just pointed at me. And anybody that's met David Brandt know what his feature was? Hold your hand up, sir. So David has one of these old, fat, farmer, thick fingers, right? And David points at me, and this gentleman's got big hands, but they would be small, size small compared to David. So David points right at me, and he's a big barrel-chested man. The barrel's just a little sunken. He's wearing bib overalls. He's in a soil pit, the soil pulpit, I'll call it, because all the disciples are circled around, and he points right at me. He says, son, I want to tell you something. I can do way more with roots than you can, with that machine right there. And so he's pointing at me, and I wasn't sure if he was going to slap me or spank me. Okay? But that's what it felt like. And David and I went on to form this phenomenal friendship. And because of the age of David, he's about the same age as my dad, he's not a texter, he's not an emailer, he's a phone caller. And you know, with today's technology, the only thing that would wreck the surprise is his name would come up at call display and it's David Brandt. And he would always say, Blake, it's David. And I'm like, yes, David, how are you today? And he would tease me, and we just had a terrific friendship. And we got to speak on the stage together at different conferences over the years. And I'll be forever indebted to No Till on the Plains because one of David's final talks was at No Till on the Plains, and I was there as well speaking that day. And I just revered this man. And this quote comes from one of my favorite movies. Does anybody know what movie this is? The quote is, no man is a failure who has friends. Anybody recognize that quote? It's from It's a Wonderful Life. So Clarence writes that in the back of the book to George, right? In the back of the Bible, and says, or I guess it's not the Bible, it's the back of Tom Sawyer, I think is the book, but it says, no man is a failure who has friends. Next slide, please. I mentioned this man earlier today, Carlos Corvetto from Chile. And Carlos' thick Spanish accent that I do a huge disservice to, but he would say, let me tell you something. Friend, it's all about the carving. The carving is the food for the soil. The food for the soil. And like I said earlier, when you grab a hold of his soil, next slide please, and you bring it up to your nose, like you can just smell that soil. And the way I describe it, like how many people, don't be embarrassed gentlemen, have had to wash dishes after a fried chicken dinner, right? Right? So you know how you get that grease, that fat on your fingers? When you grab that soil, that's what it's like. And it's all those microbes that are in that soil. And it has the most pungent aroma, right? The most delectable fragrance. And I know those are big words for American friends here in Kansas, delectable. Pungent. Next slide, please. And this man I got to meet in Paraguay, Rolf Dirch. And I've got to meet Dwayne Beck and David Brandt by this point, and friendships with both of those guys, and then Carlos and now Rolf. And so I'm in this canopy of soybeans that were like up to my rib cage. And I pulled the canopy back and I crawled down on my hands and knees and I'm capturing this video. And to this day, I do not know what I said on the video. But Rolf is standing there listening to me record whatever it is I was saying. And with tears in his eyes, he's like, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life. So I said to Rolf, Rolf, what happens when you guys aren't here to keep propelling this message of no-till forward, of conservation, right? And he's like, literally, this grown man is sitting there with tears streaming down his cheeks. And he said, that, my friend, that is why you're here. How powerful is that? And I feel indebted to these guys that I've been able to stand on their shoulders, right? I haven't invented the wheel. I'm just one of these guys who've been fortunate enough to adopt some of these things that they've done that I've learned along the way and try and make my life for my wife and my 2 kids better, on our farm in southwestern Ontario, Canada. Next slide, please. So the oxymorons, right? So the definition of an oxymoron is a figure of speech in which apparently contradictory terms appear in conjunction. A lot of big words. 2 that come to mind today in agriculture, next slide please, are conservation tillage. How can we conserve with tillage? The minute we do tillage, we're degrading the resource, period. Period, right? People get offended with the term regenerative agriculture. Why? Because the opposite of regenerative is degenerative. And nobody wants to be seen as a degenerate, right? And I understand it. Most people in this business of agriculture consider themselves to be a soil steward. But when we hear stories about dust blowing across interstates, causing wrecks, and things like that, and then taking no personal responsibility, or the legislature or the jurisdiction in which they live not holding those people accountable, there's something wrong. Right? We need to do better. The soil is not an infinite resource. And in our business, regardless of the fact if I'm going to have kids that are going to succeed me or not, and that looks like we're not going to have kids that are going to take over our farming business, I want to do everything in my power to ensure that the farmland that we manage today is better for future generations, regardless if they're my kids or they're somebody else's. Right? Regardless if they're my kids or they're somebody else's. And the next oxymoron in agriculture today, tragically, and I'm not here to vilify people that happen to be a sales agronomist, but are sales agronomists. And why sales agronomist is such an oxymoron is because intrinsically those people are tied to a product, right? They represent a company and they have to toe the company line tragically. Those that are able to differentiate themselves and recognize and admit that maybe there's a complementary product out there that they're not going to receive a dime of compensation from, that might be a good fit for what they're trying to work towards, those are the ones that set themselves apart. If you can find those ones, knock your socks off, because they'll do you a world of good. Next slide, please. So this is us, 1,200 acres, corn, soybeans, winter wheat, cereal, rye, cover crops, tall grass, prairie that I'll touch upon. Next slide. This is our soil. This is what it looks like when it's moldboard plowed. The moldboard plow is still alive and well across southwestern Ontario. I show this slide on every single one of my presentations, and I ask the same question. How many of you would like to call this soil their own? That is the exact response I receive every single time. How many of you would like to give this to your spouse in a divorce settlement? Your sibling in an estate equalization payment? Right? This is Brookston clay. That's what it's called. It's old glacial lake bottom, like I said. The topography is flat. It's classified as imperfectly drained. Tile drainage on our topography and our soil type is paramount to our success. We're tiling a lot of fields when they were broken out of trees, because that was our native flora and fauna, hardwood deciduous forest. We're tiled at about 66 feet, 4 rod. Then they went to 2 rod. Now they're down to a rod. The old timers would know what is a rod, right? How many feet are in a rod? 16 feet. So we got fields that are tiled at 16 feet apart. Like, think about that. That's pathetic. If I bought a farm today and I was going to start over from scratch and I thought it needed more tile, I'd probably tile it at 20 and be done. Okay? But knowing what I know now with what I'm using with the cows and the cover crops and everything else, I've got a field right now that I think I should add more tile, and I'm like, do I really need the tile? We're starting to infiltrate water better. The crop's more uniform, right? So I think right here, this is where we need to install the drainage in between our ears, okay? Next slide, please. January 2nd, 2023, to till or not to till? Any Shakespeare lovers in the room? Anybody have to take Shakespeare in high school? Were you guys required to take Shakespeare? A few nodding heads, yeah. University, right? Maybe a few people. Anyways, that's Hamlet. To be or not to be. To till or not to till. Next slide. So this is, back up, sorry. So when you moldboard plow, you're not done the process of preparing the soil for the next crop, obviously. You go in there with a land plane, right, Tyrell? A land plane. At home, we call that an angle iron land leveler. You smooth it off, and then you'll come back with another pass, maybe a field cultivator or whatever. So you've got 3 passes, and you haven't even put the seed in the ground yet. So this is January. The soil is totally bare of residue. Next slide, please. My dad and I planted this tree line, right? Those are cedars. And you can see as the prevailing winds come from the west, that's brought all that soil through the trees. Those snowdrifts, next slide please, are 8 foot tall. So in the words of Johnny Cash, how high is the water, mama? 4 feet high and rising. How high is the water, mama? She said it's 4 feet high and rising. So how high is the snowdrift? And in this case, it's not snow, it's snert, right? Snow and dirt is snert. Snert is an actual term that came from, in the dictionary, look it up, it came from the streets of Chicago, where you'd get all this detritus that's on the street, all this dirt and muck and everything else mixed with snow, and they called it snert. So that's 8 feet tall, these snowdrifts, saturated with soil. Pathetic. What an awesome visual indicator about soil erosion. There's nothing better. Next slide, please. This is my mother-in-law's front porch. She's a rural resident, lives out in the country, surrounded by people that are aggressive tillage junkies. They have a lot of vegetable production, right? They grow processing tomatoes. They grow seed corn. So the soil's left bare. My mother-in-law and father-in-law, my father-in-law has passed away now, but they immigrated to Canada from Holland. Anybody know anything particular about the Dutch? They're very frugal, but not only are they very frugal / cheap, frugal's a big word for Americans, they're cheap, but they're very, very, very particular, very tidy people. If you've ever got the chance to travel to Amsterdam or Holland as a country, it's beautiful, beautiful. This drives my mother-in-law crazy, as you can expect, right? She's like, why is there all this dirt, right, on the front porch? And so, you get the right environment. And I ask people, like, if you're dealing with a financial advisor and he turns your portfolio to cash, puts the cash in the safe in the office, he forgets to lock the safe at the end of the day, and heaven forbid there's a B&E, right? Break and enter. Your cash is gone. Would you think very much of your financial advisor? No, right? You'd want to strangle the guy or worse, right? But yet we do this with our largest capital asset, is our soil, and we think nothing of it. We think of it as a cost of doing business. Next slide, please. So January 22nd, underneath that cover crop, where that soil drift was, right? That snow drift saturated with soil, the soil drift. This is what our soil looks like. Now, how many people would like to call that soil their own? Yeah, I see a few nods. Don't be embarrassed. You can say that the Canadian's doing a good job, right? I know it's hard to admit, but that's good. I'm really happy. It looks like cottage cheese, right? Next slide, please. And that's January, right? When we don't have a lot of high functioning, or we don't think that the soil's functioning. Any of you people happen to own a solar panel? Have you got one? Yeah. So does the meter Does the meter on the solar panel on the shortest day of the year, which is December 21st, right? Does the meter still continue to turn? Yeah, sun's out. If the sun's out, the meter's there. And it turns in January, it turns in February, it turns in March, April. But tragically, our crops that we grow, our annual crops that we grow in this environment that has winter, so many months of the year there is not a living root there. And we got to get back to thinking about keeping the soil covered. Because I can guarantee you, when this soil was all covered by prairie years and years ago, there was not a dead ounce of soil, right? It was all covered by living roots. They might be slowed down in their metabolism, but there were still living roots there. So look at this water erosion. Like I said, our topography is flat, and this is significant rill erosion on flat ground. And you can tell it's winter because the ditch bank's frozen, that's ice, and all of the soil comes out of the ditch, right? Phosphorus and nitrogen rich soil. Next slide, please. So that's what soil looks like when it's undisturbed. You got your thatch, well aggregated. You can tell this is my corn crop at the time, my fat Freddie Flintstone feeder there. And you've got all this biomulch there, this thatch. Next slide, please. So like Albert Einstein said, those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. And I knew that no-till was not causing the problem with Lake Erie. And that's what propelled me to apply for my scholarship, to try and provide a voice of reason to say, as a practitioner, I know what you're trying to force down our throat is wrong. Because on an annual basis, we have these millions and millions of gallons of bypass that happen when we have these big storm events at cities, right? What about that impact that's having as we dump more phosphorus that comes inevitably from each and every one of us, right? Because why? Why? Shit happens. Shit happens, right? Folks, I know you're getting hungry, but that was funny. Go ahead. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the confidence of Nuffield. Here I am. I'm adopting these things that a lot of us in the room are familiar with, a big multi-species cover crop. That's an 18-way cover crop. Looking pretty good. That's about the fall of the year. We can see we can just have had a frost. Like I talked about, I have very trace amount of corn in the blend, but we can just sort of see a little impact of a frost on that corn leaf. So I know we're getting towards the tail end of the season, but looking pretty good. Next slide, please. And so you can't really see this at the top, but it says establishing new habits, creating new habitat, teaching old dogs new tricks. So the old dog that I'm referring to is not my dog Lucy, who we've had to lay to rest, but the old dog in our operation is obviously Dad, right? I work with my father. I'm very lucky that my parents have given me the reins, like many young people, right? I don't take that for granted. They took some risk to build up their assets, and now I'm building it up in conjunction. We've merged our farm that we have bought, my wife and I, when I say our farm, the farmland that we have bought independently, and my mom and dad, we have now merged their business with our business, and I pay them an annual stipend, basically a return on equity. That's how it works, okay? Like a living wage, essentially. But my dad, growing up in the no-till environment that he started with his brothers, it was brown and down, right? Everything was start clean, finish clean. They didn't have the luxury either, though, of resistant crops that we have to do, that every farmer has access to in the 80s. But I'm not even using those crops. Like, I'm using non-GMO beans, like I said. I am back to growing traded corn because trying to find liquidity for non-GMO corn, like a liquid, readily accessible market for non-GMO corn was a bit of a struggle. But nonetheless, I have gone back to traded corn away from growing non-GMO corn, but still growing non-GMO soybeans and growing wheat as well. That allows me to grow these big cover crops post-wheat harvest. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Christine Jones from Australia would say, it's all about the liquid carbon pathway, right? Taking the free energy of the sun and driving it down to the soil with living roots, capturing that photosynthesis, right? Releasing that simple sugar to feed the microbiology. And that's what it's all about. It's feeding the microbes with root exudates, those sugars that come off the roots. Next slide. And so I touched upon this morning. This is the seed size spectrum. So you can see there's your faba bean, and in there you'd have these little smaller seeds like a millet or you know, you might be lucky if you can pick out something like rape. It's really hard to see from the back for sure, but that's the seed size spectrum that I talked about, with the clicker being the faba bean end, and then the rape would be at the other end. Next slide, please. So why do I get excited by cover crops? So this is a corn crop. Next slide. This one will, so I can use less nitrogen. Next. Zero tillage. Next. Zero erosion from wind, water, and solar. Next. Increased biological activity. Next. Capturing solar energy 12 months of the year. Next. Increased water infiltration. Next. Increased water holding capacity. Next. And I can increase my financial yield. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is how we maximize our ROI, our return on investment. Whenever I go to the banker, they have never yet asked me, what was your corn yield? What was your soybean yield? What was your wheat yield? They don't ask about yield. They ask about, did you make any money, right? They want to see the financial statements. They don't give a damn about yield. They care about, are we making money? Are we profitable? Next slide, please. I took this slide this year. That was taken right around July the 18th. So this is my cornfield that was planted into wheat stubble, a failed cover crop. The cover crop didn't grow for whatever reason. I don't know if it was herbicide residual problem. It just did not grow. So what was there was a smattering of weeds, whatnot, and then you've got this high carbon wheat straw that's left. The farmers in my environment will not do this practice, right? The first order of business with wheat stubble is they chop it with a bush hog mower or a flail mower. Then they do that primary tillage pass, whether it's a plow, whether it's a soil saver, whether it's a disc chisel, whether it's a vertical tillage tool, whatever their tillage favorite implement is, that's what they use. For me to go out there with a set of trash whippers on my corn planter and do this, and all I did was I waited about 1 week later than everybody else. 1 week later, and that's what the corn crop looked like. And it doesn't want for anything. It doesn't want for anything. And we're in a drought, and that's what the corn's looking like. Frederick Thomas, another man I met from France on my journey, his words of wisdom are, I never worry about a crop with deep roots. I never worry about a crop with deep roots. And in our soil type, the only way we can have deep roots is we have to work tirelessly to avoid compaction. And we need to have that decaying root from the previous crop that's still intact to allow the next crop to infiltrate down deep into the soil profile. Because we have this mass, as Dwayne Beck would say, we have this massive reservoir of water below that crop because that sustained that Carolinian hardwood forest. We just need to figure out a way how to get it. Next slide, please. So you look at that floor there, where just like I touched upon, high lignin, high carbon. Wheat straw is just below cereal rye for its CN ratio, right? So it takes a long time to degrade. But when it does get moist, it retains that moisture. Next slide, please. So if you look at the architecture of the plant, of corn specifically, what I love, the only thing that was sustaining us were these heavy dews. But you can see just with the dew, that water is funneled down that plant and it's all wet. So right here in between the rows, I'd be breaking my fingernails off if I tried to dig. But I could grab that soil where the root ball is and it's just all mellow, right? Next slide, please. I'm going to touch upon this briefly. This is my own, again, intellectual property. I created this slide. Rightly or wrongly, because it's met with some consternation from different people. That's another big word, right? Some apprehension, some reservation, all kinds of adjectives I can use to describe the tension it's created. In an ideal world of communication today in agriculture, this is how it should be, regardless if you're in the bank or whether you're an extension worker or whether you're a farmer. Conversation, communication should flow freely, regardless if you're the farmer, the primary producer, or you're somewhere up along the top of this food chain. So whether you're the government, whether you're a university, whether you work for the bank, whether you're ag extension corporations, retailers, whatever. Tragically, when there are new people or people that have a new opinion about a methodology that has significant merit, those that rest up here that see an idea like a farmer has, like I do, as highly disruptive to the current model, right? Because I'm reducing my fertilizer chemical seed costs. It's very easy for these people that sit above this food chain to sit there with guns pointed, arrows drawn, and knock me off, then simply extend the hand out and bring me to the top to help share and educate and inform people about an alternative methodology that could create more financial stability that every banker should want, right? Everybody, every little town would be that much more vibrant if our farmers have more liquidity, right? Next slide, please. So, in the words of the late, great Paul Harvey, please stay tuned for the rest of the story. It's lunch, folks. Thank you for listening. For the rest of the story. The projector's not on.
Oh, yeah, the projector's not on.
That helps.
Time, people, okay?
We'll boot up. We'll boot up. So what's the prediction? Super Bowl final. Kansas City against Detroit Lions. Anybody interested? No? No? Anybody? What's the prediction? Who do people cheer for here? Chiefs? Packers? Broncos? Anyway, there's Packers, Chiefs, Vikings. Any Vikings fans in the audience? Oh, we're having some technical difficulties here.
Wake it up. I should have started.
So, one of the first things that you find a lot of us in this space is this word called regenerative agriculture that I touched upon. And I'm not a fan of labels, okay? I like a familiar brand of underwear because I enjoy the cut that it has. So typically I gravitate towards that brand for all the obvious reasons. Because once you're familiar with something like that, that's critically important to sort of stay the course, as it were. But when they change the ingredients, or the composition of the percent of cotton or whatever, that just is not good necessarily. So regenerative agriculture, like I said earlier, the reason there's such opposition because the opposite of regenerative is degenerative. But I got thrown in this camp of regenerative agriculture, and people would come up to me time and time again and say, well, you're doing regenerative agriculture. I said, well, hold on a second. One of the critical components, as I understand regenerative agriculture to be, is the integration of livestock, which we didn't have any. The cattle at home were removed from our farm. First, the dairy herd left in 1974, just after the introduction of supply management, which you guys know to be the quota system, okay? And that it provides price stability in Canada. It also prevents the oversupply of milk as well. So you don't have these peaks and valleys in production like it's familiar with so many other commodities. So the cows left in 74, the Holstein herd. And we had a small feedlot, about 300 fat steers until the 80s when, price of cattle went through the floor and interest rates went through the roof. So with the exception of a few 4-H steers, we haven't had any cattle. And I grew up literally in the dairy barn in a playpen. So all of the sounds, the smells, and everything else that go along with the cattle industry were in my nostrils. They're part of my DNA. And so being the cattle guy, I always said to my dad, I want to have some cattle back on the farm. And my dad said, well, land's too expensive. Land's too expensive. Well, as we all know, land has continued to just do what? Go up, go up, go up. So a couple of years ago, I decided to wrap a piece of land. It's a 19-acre parcel. It's severed off by a ditch, but it's still easily accessible by the road. But I thought, after being in Brazil and seeing what they're mandated to set aside for conservation area, I said, it's not going to kill me financially to take some land and set it aside as basically similar to CRP, but without getting a dime of compensation by a government, other than the establishment cost of the seeds, it were. I established a prairie. So I started putting the wire around the prairie, and my dad's like, what the hell are you doing? And my dad's a very social guy. Might not be quite as social as I am, but still, doesn't mind visiting with people. So in the summertime, we just harvested wheat on the front side, on the opposite side of the prairie. We haven't had any cattle inside of the area that I fenced. And I thought, well, this is a great time to put some fence posts out, some wood fence posts, because when you go around a curve, right, the fence that I was using, the fence posts were wanting to lean. It was sort of a Gallagher product, step-in post. And so I hired a contractor. They're out there because they're not going to do any crop damage. And my dad literally comes flying in the field with his pickup truck. He looks at the contractor. He looks at me. He does almost like a donut right there in the field, just like mats it, and screws off and takes off. It took him 3 days to ask me the question. He says, what are you going to do? Are you going to fence this whole damn farm or what? The farm that I own, which is the home farm where he grew up as a boy. He still thinks that home farm is his farm. Okay, my aunt and uncle owned the farm, but my dad still thinks home is home. It's his, but it's not. He's not the one that pays the mortgage to my aunt and uncle, or to the bank in this case, right? As my, So anyways, my dad was always the cattle guy. Even though he didn't want me to have the cattle, I think he thought more it was going to be another job that he was going to have to be involved with, that he didn't want to add more complexity. But the day, next slide, do you have this clicker? Can I use the clicker? Then I won't have to holler at you, you can just enjoy. Down?
Point to this. Oh, okay.
The day that these cattle walked off the truck, as much crap my dad has given me and criticism, I've never seen such a smile on his face in my entire life. My dad got outvoted by his brothers when they closed the feedlot. And my dad is the business guy. He always did the books of the business, okay, for all three entities. And luckily, they had their business structured in such a way that they didn't own land together. They only owned depreciable assets, machinery together, okay? But Dad nonetheless did the books, and they would share that equity, that machinery equity, and they would share their labor, more importantly, to get the job done. But my dad, being the livestock guy, when those cattle walked off the trailer that day, my dad just sat there and he said, holy cow, like he didn't have to say it, but he thought, you just saw it come to fruition, right? You followed through on what you said. And at the outset, my dad was harping at me to go and buy some cattle. And I said, Dad, I don't want to buy any cattle because I don't want to tie up a bunch of equity. What if I don't like this grazing? I'm just a little bit of wire. But if I don't like grazing, I said, I'd like to find a partner. So these cattle here in this picture, I was custom grazing for a guy who was getting paid $2.40 per head per day. So a cow-calf pair was $2.40, the bull was $2.40, the heifer was $2.40. Pretty good money with very little risk. Now that is hairy vetch, ladies and gentlemen. That is in flower. And according to K-State, you're not supposed to graze hairy vetch. According to K-State, you're not supposed to graze hairy vetch. I have done it without any issues whatsoever. I try to turn cattle out on the hairy vetch. So I'm rotational grazing. I have polywire. I don't move the cattle on the forage like this in the morning when there's dew on the plants. I wait till there's peak bricks. So about 4 o'clock in the afternoon or after supper, I'll drop the wire, let them move over there when the plants have the most sugar possible. And they can graze through the night and into the morning. They're full. There's no problem. I haven't lost an animal due to hairy vetch. But because of that article that K-State, or research K-State did, it appeared in the No-Till Farmer magazine, the veterinarian calls me up. The veterinarian that works with the guy who owns the cattle, who I just finally found the right partner. And I was all excited about this relationship. And the vet says, you need to take those cattle off the minute you see one blossom. I said, hold on a second. I said, do you have any experience with hairy vetch? Well, no, but this article says you're going to have problems with hairy vetch. I said, well, I too have a network. And I touched upon the last presentation that no man is an island, right? I've been fortunate enough to stand on the shoulders of others. So I reached out to some guys like a Gabe Brown, like a Rick Bieber, who you might recognize that name, who have grazed thousands and thousands of head of cattle. And I said, have you ever had a problem grazing hairy vetch? And the answer was no. No. So that gave me the confidence to take the knowledge that they had and their experience and move forward, right? So 2021 was the year we brought the cattle back, 50 years later, and that's based upon old photos of the farm, right? Some aerial photographs where the Holsteins were out on grass and behind the barn. We finally had ruminants back on our soil. This presentation, I've coined it Cows, Crops, and Community. Okay, this part of the presentation. My friend from Western Canada who has over 1,000 mama cows and a lot of land, like thousands and thousands of acres of land, he said it to me best. So there's my shovel, the wooden handled round top shovel. And he said, Blake, you drive over more feed in a year than I make. Because I was the guy that was at home planting green into the market, right? I would typically go into this field with my John Deere planter, I would drive over top and I would plant corn into that environment. What's going on here? So anyways, when I had those cows there, the only compliment that I received after those cows had left, and the cows had never been rotationally grazed, came from the owner, who the cows are like his hobby. A multifaceted businessman, very successful. And his hired man, the longtime herdsman, said to me, he said, these calves have never looked this good for their day of age. That was the only compliment that I got, and that was the only one that I needed to know that I was on the right path. This is year one. So year two, I'm anticipating the cows coming back, which they did, but this time he comes with a full-time herdsman. And the herdsman now is in the business of doing what? As any purebred operation likes to do, what do they like to do with their time? They like to chase ribbons and belt buckles, right? They want to take their cattle to market those genetics against their contemporaries at this, in our case, at the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto, or if they go to the west, the Western Canadian Agribition, sometimes cattle will come down here to Denver, things like that too, if they get some really firecracker cattle. So year three, so I had the cattle there year two, and the first thing they do, they bring out a creep feeder because they want to increase the performance of the calves. And I said, hold on a second. I said, you're paying me good money to have these cattle here. Why do you think you need that creep feeder? It defeats the purpose of rotational grazing. So I tell you these stories because it's all about getting the right partner. Okay, finding the right partner. Well, because I was a contradiction to the herdsman that he's now hired, and I told the owner, I said, I really don't want the creep feeder there. And he said, I figured as much. He said, if you don't want it there, Blake, he said, just take it out. It'll be no problem. I said, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. They're my cattle. Okay. Year three comes along, and I've decided I'm going to plant a warm season cover crop. So I've got a cool season cover crop after winter, similar to that hairy vetch picture. But we're going to plant a warm season cover crop similar to what we saw today. And I'm going to throw my cows in there and graze it. And you can see this is towards the end of the season, right? We've got a couple nice mature ears of corn there. And that's just corn. I went into the grain bin, took a scoop shovel, threw into the blend. And it looks beautiful, right? It looks beautiful. I have no cows there to utilize that. So I called a longtime feedlot guy that's fed a lot of cattle in our municipality. And I said, hey, do you mind coming for a walk? I've got some forage that I'd like to graze down with some steers potentially. And do you know what he said to me immediately? This is getting to be, the end of the year. It's getting to be October. Do you know what he said to me? He said, son, now's not the time to be putting cattle on grass. Now's the time to be taking cattle off grass. I said, well, it's not really grass. It's cover crop. And he repeated himself. So right away, I knew this wasn't the correct partner, right? So move forward. It's not the correct partner. And in all respect, I appreciate the fact that making money in the cattle industry until recent years has been a tough, tough, tough business. And I can appreciate that those people that have a recipe for success do not want to deviate from what has been successful, right? They're not trying to change it up. But baby, let me tell you, it's a jungle out there. As we saw today, right? There's the quad, it's in the middle. And I asked people, like, how many cattle, so the non-farmers in the room, or the non-grazers in the room, which you guys, some of you are, but how many head of cattle, and we saw it today, like how many head of cattle could I sustain out there? And the simple answer is, a hell of a lot, right? We saw it today, right? So is this a missed opportunity or a learning event? And there's that quote, right, that I shared earlier. So now we've had a frost, right? It's graying off, it's drying down. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this mess? This is literally right out my back window, and I'm looking at this. And my wife's looking at it. My wife is what? What's my wife? She's Dutch. My wife's Dutch, right? I told you what my in-laws are. 100%. My wife's purebred Dutch. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The only negative criticism I get from my wife as it pertains to my farming management, my cover crop management, my cattle management, is when it's fly season. Because what comes with flies? Shit. And they like to gather around the windows, right, and leave their little evidence that they were there behind. But other than that, she is all 100% in favor of what it is that we're working towards, and she sees it, and she's not a farmer, right? She does the books. She understands the economics to a T. So I know if I'm not there, nobody's going to pull the wool over her eyes because she understands the inside out of the business. She might not be the one to fix the tractor, but she knows everything else about the business. So again, is this a learning opportunity? Is this a missed opportunity or a learning event? So I decided to take the corn head out to the field, and that didn't work so well, so I took the draper out there and I harvested it for grain. So this is what we ended up with. No nitrogen fertilizer, no phosphorus, no potash, no herbicide, no fungicide, no sprayer depreciation, just planting and harvested some seed. And just planting and harvesting, and some seed cost. Now, who can make money doing that? My friends, when I play these little fun games of poker, they like to refer to me as Mr. Alligator Arms. Okay? Do you know why? Because an alligator has these short little arms, right? And he can't get his hands back down in his pockets. So when I run out of chips, I'm done. Right? I go home. Right? I'm like, not that I'm a sore loser, but I'm cheap. And it's from all those years of rubbing up against that Dutch girl. It must be. I'm convinced of it. But nonetheless, right? This is how we keep the wolves off our doorstep. The wolves being the people that want to foreclose on our farms. The people that want to think that we need the latest and greatest technology or the biggest and best horsepower, right? So here comes the subsequent crop, right? I went in there with the corn head, like I said, and there's the understory plants. So again, like how many cattle, after even that residue that's there, the seed has been taken out, how many cattle could I have sustained in there? And the answer is lots. And so my buddy, he has some Black Angus cattle. He's an organic farmer. He's a guidance teacher at this local high school. And he's always trying to convince me that I need to be organic. And I said, Chris, I don't want to have a fight on my hands with my dad and my uncle. My uncle was still farming with me at the time, and dad was there because they have no desire to be organic. And truthfully, I want to have access to all the tools in the toolbox. So I have no desire to be organic either. And somehow regenerative has come along the line of a lot of the non-farmers in society somehow think that regenerative means that it's organic as well. But the thing that I see when I observe organic farming practices, not all, but there is a lot of excessive tillage because they have to combat the common denominator, weeds. And when you have to do this tillage, inevitably it leads to really, really, really poor soil. And so my buddy, this is his quote. He said, Blake, when you brought those cattle back, now you just made your farm a whole lot more interesting. And it's true. But sadly, I get a lot more questions from my non-farming neighbors than I ever do from my actual neighbors who are farming. And the reason that is, folks, is I'm convinced it's far easier to criticize and condemn than afford somebody a simple compliment. Because they themselves really don't want me to be successful. Because if I'm successful, that means they need to contemplate change. Doing something that they have no desire to do or see their sibling do or see their offspring, their sons or their daughter do, right? Because they look at this as not an opportunity, they see it as a threat. So this is another hashtag. Again, the hashtag is your number sign that I've become sort of familiarized with around the world, okay? And it was because I was in the right place at the right time. So this is called Soil Your Undies, and basically it's called, in all actuality, it's referred to as the cotton test. So the cotton test, because in Canada we don't grow cotton, so we don't have access to rolls of big cotton batting, but we do have access to cotton underwear. You basically bury the cotton underwear with a flag or a stake or whatever up to the waistband. Try to do it when the soils are most biologically active. So in the spring, typically, when they've got enough moisture and plants are starting to grow, and you come back after 6 weeks and you dig that back up. And what this is showing is, to the casual onlooker, that there is living biology in the soil, right? So the cotton test is designed to show people that the biology is consuming the lignin, right? The cellulose, which is the cotton. So this is a field that had cover crops and no-till. This field is right across the road. That's conventional tillage. Both had the same crop growing, which was corn at the time. Yes, I trespassed. This was my neighbor's field. Okay? The young lady that brought those underwear out was a summer student. She was working towards her master's, worked for my former 4-H leader. And she said, Blake, I want to do this experiment. I said, sure, knock your socks off, whatever. She didn't tell me that we're going to be burying men's tighty whities in the field, like the Homer Simpson special, right? And so when Claire showed up and she opened up the trunk of her car and she pulled out this underwear, I'm thinking, okay, do not say anything that is sexually inappropriate, that I could find myself in the court, right, being whatever. So, but what I said to Claire when we buried number 6 in my field, I said, do you have a spare pair? So I buried those. We walked across the field, and I set it to motion when we dug them out via YouTube. So if you look back in the history and the archives of YouTube, and you look up Blake Vince, cotton underwear, or underwear test, or soil test, or whatever, you'll see a video that I put out there too. So this hashtag, a group that I used to belong to in Ontario called the Innovative Farmers Association of Ontario, we came up collectively with this hashtag, Soil Your Undies. It has gone around the world and has become, in the UK, Soil Your Briefs, or Soil Your Pants. And in Australia, it's called Soil Your Jocks. But nonetheless, it's the same principles, okay? And what it does is it provides a little bit of laughter. And the minute that you cause people to chuckle or snicker, you immediately trigger the memory reflex. So if nothing else that I've said to you today, the next time you look at your underwear, maybe you'll think of this guy right there. Now, I would have to be in a lot better physical condition than I am today to model those for you. But I did this with my kids at the time when they were in 4-H themselves, with my kids' 4-H club. They came out to our farm, and I gave them all a pair of underwear to take home to their own farms. And when I dug those out 6 weeks later, like, that's all that was left. Pretty cool. Pretty cool, right? And it's all about having fun. Like, I hope that's what you appreciate about me. I try not to take myself too seriously, right? I know I'm the guy up here holding the microphone, but I'm just like you guys. I put my pants on in the morning, no pun intended, one leg at a time, right? Like, I go to work like we all do. We try to make a respectable living in this business of agriculture that at times has its stresses. We all know it's an incredibly stressful business. But that's why it's so important that we reflect back on that tagline that I said earlier, right? That no man or a woman is an island. I hope that you realize that, yeah, I might be in Canada, but I'm only a phone call away. I'm only a text away. You've got these other guys here like an Aaron, right? Same thing. Tyrell, right? It's about finding your people that when the shit hits the fan inevitably as we go through life, right? This journey, sorry to be so crass, but when things get tough, and you need some people, this is what you have this network for, to try and help compel people and get you to the next level and through that difficult swath of life. So May 15th, 2023, and this is when I needed people. Because here I am, I'm supposed to be the guy. I'm planting this beautiful green cover crop. And this is sort of how my planter is set up to do this, right? You can look it up on YouTube, Blake Vince, planting green planter setup. I get the crop planted and then the water shuts off. Well, in this business where we're not irrigating or not able to irrigate, I can't control the weather, right? I can't control the weather. And so you can just sort of see in here, we've got all of this residue. It's been burnt off with herbicide and the corn's struggling to come through. And what can you do about it? You feel desperate. Let me tell you, you feel desperate. But I always tell people, like, we don't harvest a crop in June, thankfully. But we get so enamored by these old adages, right? Knee high by the 4th of July, and it has to look such and such a stage of growth, and blah, blah, blah. Well, what I've discovered is this is a bear path where we were sort of going back and forth for whatever reason. It didn't take very well. And the spot where there was no vegetation, where it had maximum solar radiation, is where you could row the corn. But we also had this challenge here, where we were not only dry because we had no water, but we were struggling for light. So this was the impact of forest fires, and that were a long ways away from us, like in northern Ontario, Quebec, Western Canada, and yet it was inundating southwestern Ontario. So it's like 7 a.m. You could look at the sun up until about 10:30 in the morning. You could look at the sun and not hurt your eyes. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have a hard time looking at the sun with sunglasses on, much less with bare eyes, right? So when you have that much of a solar radiation negatively impacting your crop growth and development, that is a challenge. So what I have done, I've started to use sometimes, if necessary, a different management strategy, and I'm using a flail mower, and I learned this from the seed corn industry, that they sometimes burn male corn, the designated male rows, to align the pollination nick with the females. So if the growing point is below the soil, you can go in there with a flail mower, flail it tight to the ground. That corn will pop out another leaf in 3 days, and then it's off to the races. But it gives you a little bit of heartburn, right? This is high anxiety farming. And there's been more than one occasion when I'm sure my neighbors have said, well, there's that idiot doing that again, right? That's not going to happen on my farm, I can rest assured. And June the 10th, right, this is in our wheat field. I can stick my hand down there in that crack, and I can get almost up to my elbow. So I always say on one of the golf courses I play on, similar soil type, that it's got cracks big enough to swallow small children and large goats. And that's exactly what it looks like, right? Your ball gets swallowed up in there. No problem. Don't want to drop a wrench. And so there's June the 10th, and here's the corn coming up on one of our other fields. And I got to the point where I kept reminding myself, we don't harvest in June, we don't harvest in June, stop looking at it. Well, that was the worst thing I could do, because June the 20th, I'm going to side dress, and I'm like, where's the corn? Right? I had to go, so this is at twilight. I went out to the field at twilight, and I'm like, I'm starting to side dress, I'm going, I can't see. I'm at the point of life where I need, like, these are my sunglasses, I need cheaters to start to see. So I go back there the next morning, I pull the canopy back, and there are armyworm like crazy. And so great, I've got all these mushrooms, these fruiting bodies, showing me that I have a fungal dominant soil, but I've got no crop to harvest. And my fields don't hide behind a bush lot, right? They don't hide behind 4 walls. They don't hide, in a draw. They're out there for everybody to drive by and ridicule and criticize and condemn and say, well, you dumbass, you should have known better. You can't grow a crop like that. But what the interesting observation, again, is this a failure or is this a learning opportunity? Remember that. Is that a failure or learning opportunity? So that corn I showed you 3 slides back where we just had that green strip, right? And I showed I was flail mowing it. This is what it looked like. This is the start of August. It's a long way, folks, from the finish line. It's a long way from the finish line. The other neighboring cornfields are getting ready. They're tasseling or they're just past pollination, and mine still has yet to put out a tassel. Okay? But that's what it looked like. Not too shabby. It's not wanting for much, that corn crop. We picked up on the date, July the 25th, 2023, 2 inches of rain in 1 hour. This is a flume. We're doing some edge of field research. As I talked about in the morning presentation, they're vilifying the earthworms in no-till. I initiated this project with my conservation authority where we're monitoring what's coming out of the tile because nobody has any data. It's easy to point the finger, but remember, Aaron, when you point the finger, what happens? You got 4 more fingers pointing back at you, right? So where you see this dark water, that's actually clear water coming off my field into the ditch. This is all dark water, the turbidity, right? The sediment from upstream from other farms. And the water coming off our landscape is clear. That's positive. Okay? I would like that not to be running a drop, obviously, as dry as we were. I want to retain that water. But I know that the water is cycling, right? I know that we're doing some cool things. Again, just another picture. So here's another tile outlet of Maine. And again, it looks like dark water. That's clear water coming out of our tiling system versus everything upstream is just full of sediment. And how much phosphorus is going down the drain, how much nitrogen, right? On and on and on. Pathetic. So the key thing about this experiment is we're comparing my system, no-till with cover crops, compared to my neighbor who used to sell us machinery with his conventional tillage system. So these bottles are opaque, right? So they're not 100% clear, but you can still see the contrast in management. The no-till and cover crops is significantly clearer versus this stuff here with the tillage, it's dirty water. A blind man could see that contrast. A blind man could see that contrast. So that front headland I showed you where the armyworms were, what I learned from that, what I was wanting to say is, why is this hybrid performing the way it should compared to the one that got inundated by the armyworm? Any guesses? Because as my PhD friend would say, Blake, all you have is a hypothesis. All you have is a hypothesis. You haven't done the experiment. Well, my hypothesis is this. My observation, one of the first rules that you have to do in order to do a scientific experiment is you need to observe. Okay? So I observed this. The nuances are, this is hybrid A. The one that got inundated by the bugs is hybrid B. Was there enough of a difference in the bricks, the sugar content, between hybrid A and hybrid B that the armyworm didn't like the one because alkaline stomach in insects? It couldn't ingest it. You got to sort of think a little abstractly here, but I think I'm on the right page. How do we know this? We don't know this because nobody's testing for this information. Nobody's testing this. And I can guarantee you that hybrids are not advanced and evaluated in this environment that we're planting into these big green covers. So it comes back again to this network to share information amongst people that are willing to do these things and say, well, what product is working? What herbicide is working? What herbicide is letting you down? What fertility are you using? Or what fertility are you not using? Right? It's all about working together, collaborating. That's the key word in all of this, folks. We need to work together. We need to collaborate with our peers. Years ago, you older guys would remember when you used to have a threshing machine in the neighborhood. You'd be a young boy then, right? Yourself, do you remember having a threshing machine in the neighborhood? No? My dad can just remember the last sort of threshing machine that was parked. It had just been out of use. But the point of the threshing machine is, in order to get the work done, you needed to rely on who? Your neighbors. You had to work collectively. Today in agriculture, your neighbor is not your neighbor anymore. He's the competition, or she's the competition, because the industry, sadly, is forcing us towards this great ethos of economy of scale. And in order for us to be bigger and better than best, there has to be a loser. And the loser, tragically, are these rural communities as we drive around and we see the consolidation of farmland falling into fewer hands. We see then less people at church, less people at schools, on and on and on. We've witnessed it. We've experienced it. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. So this is my prairie. And so does anybody know what the white flowers are? Don't be embarrassed. Anybody? Pardon?
Daisy?
No. Any other guesses? No. Close. Pardon? No, not milkweed. It's a weed called Queen Anne's lace or wild carrot. It's a native forb. It is, from a farmer perspective, as a guy that grows soybeans, it's the bane of my existence. Very hard to control. Classic is one of the few herbicides left that will control it. It was one of the first plants to be resistant to 2,4-D. Okay? So this herb, though, when I was in the UK, there was a young farm couple out there. They were being interviewed by the BBC, and they're way out in front with regenerative agriculture practices, and they said, of all the people you'd like to meet around the world that are in this similar space, who do you want to meet? And they said, well, we want to meet Blake Vince. I'm like, again, like I said, I'm just a guy. I'm like you. I'm a farmer. I put my pants on in the morning. I try to go to work. I try to make an honest living. I found myself in the UK. I was over there for Nuffield Business, and I looked these guys up. And I walked onto their farm, and the first words out of my mouth was, wow, I see you guys have wild carrot over here too. And the guy said to me, he says, you know what? That plant is phenomenal for beneficial insects. I said, well, it's the bane of my existence, right? Like I just, I don't want to see it. I don't like it. But the more I looked at that plant, and when I walk out there and I see how it's inundated with pollinators and insects that are fighting off other detrimental insects, do I begin to appreciate what it offers, right? Do I begin to appreciate what it offers? So beauty is in the eye of the beholder. One of the intangibles that come along with this whole management system or change management system that I did not anticipate and have, as of yet, have not been able to monetize is the return of avian species. So this bird here is, does anybody know what this bird is? Pardon? I heard somebody say it. No, it's a dickcissel. Okay? It's a dickcissel. And it's has a very distinctive song. Okay? Birders come to my farm with their great big cameras and big zoom lenses from over 5 hours away to sit there on the side of the road and hopefully get a picture of this little bird. And the funniest story, it's a Saturday morning, and I'm always watching because we have problems with break and enters, people trying to steal things to fuel their drug habit, right? And so I'm always paying attention for strange vehicles. So I go along, and this guy's there, and I said, good morning, how are you? And I'm fine. And he's really sullen. I said, what are you after? Oh, I'm looking for a bird. I said, oh yeah, what bird? Oh, I'm looking for the dickcissel. The dickcissel, oh yeah. I said, well, I think it's right there over your shoulder. Well, he spins around with his camera and click, 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 click. And then he turns around with his iPhone, pulls it out of his pocket, throws his arm around me, and starts taking selfies like I'm his long-lost buddy. I know where to lie. I would have swore he just saw Santa Claus. He was so giddy, right? Like that he got this little bird on his camera, right? He's ticked this one off the list. And I can tell story after story after story about these birders that have come over just to see this bird. That I've created this habitat on our farm just by dumb luck. Because we have changed the environment, folks, so dramatically that now these simple little things that share the ecosystem with all of us are running out of places to live. So I don't want you to think that I'm a tree hugger, okay, an environmentalist. But I remember back to my university days of taking a course called Land Resource Management. So I'm a young guy, I'm in my early 20s, and we made a mockery of that class. We called it Tree Hugger 101. And so here I am before you today. I'm a farmer, I'm 53 years of age, and I'm happy to align myself more with the tree huggers, worrying about what we're leaving for future generations, again, regardless if those kids are mine or somebody else's, right? That they can have the same opportunities to enjoy and be successful in their pursuits like I've been able to be, like you've been able to be, right? Trying to recognize that the land is only ours for such a brief period of time, right? a glimpse of time for all intents and purposes. And again, the words are there in print, right? I have been so fortunate to stand on the shoulders of others, right? And the biggest thank you I can give out to that gentle giant, the guy I referenced in the first talk, David Brandt, right, my mentor, for just simply taking me under his wing, introducing me to so many phenomenal people in this country of yours. Friends that I've got to meet from around the world, from France as well. And that's a testament to David. And so what drives me today is recognizing the time and energy that man spent of helping so many people. I will not let his memory die in vain for all the work that he has done. So am I working with the next generation? This is our son, Elliot. The first time we were moving cows out on grass with him, he just had this unique way of putting just the right amount of pressure on the cows, and he's never worked around cattle. And I said, well, how did you learn that? It was like in his DNA, like I talked about a second ago. And he said, well, Dad, he goes, this is just like Minecraft. I'm like, well, whatever, dude. Like, but he could just move those cows, and he would just move the four-wheeler around and just put the pressure on, and was so gentle and calm. And so where the young guy that works for me has this affinity for machinery, Elliot has an affinity for the environment, and he has an appreciation for what his dad is working towards. Will he be a farmer? The jury's out. If he isn't a farmer, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Because he has a lot to give to the world, right? He's pretty special. Pretty special. I'm working on trying to get him to get some confidence around ladies, but that's not working so well. But anyways. And how do I know I have happy cows? How do I know I have happy cows? Here's a manure pat that I captured, and this is not photoshopped. This is just the way it fell out of the anus, right? And I just happened to be there, and I took a picture of it, and I think I sent it off to Aaron, and I sent it off to a few guys that are in this space, and just by dumb luck, right? But anyways, I like to have fun. And like I said, I try not to take myself too seriously. I want to just, point out some things. If we build it, we've heard that whole slogan from Field of Dreams, the baseball movie with Kevin Costner. If we build it, it'll come. So these are dung beetles here destroying that soil pat. And these are my cows today. And this is what they look like. So it's predominantly it's a Hereford cow herd. And if I can get this thing to play, yeah, you'll see the red-headed stranger. And if you just listen, that's what you hear. There's no hooping and hollering. There's no come on girls. It's just drop the wire. And you just sort of stand back. You put a little bit of pressure on them. And they're off to that sward. And there's the red-headed stranger, like I said. Does anybody know who the red-headed stranger is? Anybody? Who's the red-headed stranger? Willie Nelson. Yeah. And so I'm grazing in that scenario there. I'm grazing alfalfa. And again, people say, oh, are you going to have bloat? And touch wood, I'd never had any bloat until this spring, and I think I lost one animal because I put them out there too early in the day, right? That was my management, right? I was moving the cows out of my convenience, so in the morning there was just a little bit of lush regrowth. It was only about 3 to 4 inches tall. The calf was at a stage where I thought he wasn't really taking in as much forage as he actually was, and I don't know if he had his stomach as mature as it needed to be for the alfalfa. And I found him in the afternoon, legs up in the air, right? So, again, I share those stories with you because is it what? Is it what? What did I say all along? Is it what? Is it a mistake? Or or a learning opportunity, right? So that's today's herd. And you can see there's the alfalfa. Then I love that picture. Blue sky, alfalfa and flower. And those cows are milking. Like those calves are thriving, right? And my favorite part of the day today on the farm is sitting out there on my quad in the afternoon as the sun's sort of going down and just listening to the birds and the insects. And that's my solitude out there. That's my solitude. So 500 years ago, ladies and gentlemen, we knew more about the movement of celestial bodies. That's a big word, celestial bodies, about the stars in heaven. We knew more about the stars in heaven 500 years ago than we did, okay, about the soil underfoot. That was Leonardo da Vinci 500 years ago. He said that. We know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot. Here we are 500 years later, and much is still the same, right? We know what lies beyond the great beyond out there, outside of our solar system, but yet we still find soil to be a mystery. How tragic is that? The thing that sustains us all, living on this planet, and we ignore it on a daily basis. This is what we need to focus on, the resource. The resource, if we have a chance to do anything for the next generation. Here's my contact information. I'll leave that up there. The last slide is me, and I'll post in a second, but thank you very much. Can I open the floor to some questions, please? Don't be embarrassed. I'm standing between you and beer, and I got some pretty snazzy hats to hand out for questions.
So are you going to continue to graze hairy vetch, or are you going to move on to something else?
I am going to continue to graze hairy vetch without a shadow of a doubt.
What?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you.
Yes, hairy vetch has a very, very, very good protein. It grows well in my environment, my soil type. I don't have to inoculate it. It's very easy to produce. I've grown hairy vetch for seed. I've actually harvested 4 plants simultaneously as a seed crop. So after winter, when I plant these big 18-way cover crops, usually the plants that survive winter are hairy vetch, cereal rye, crimson clover, Austrian winter peas, and of course volunteer wheat. And if I have any sort of brassicas in there, like a purple top turnip, those ones will sort of overwinter and survive. They'll all senesce, so they'll all come into flower at the same time. They'll sink, and they'll all die and mature, and I'll harvest them simultaneously, and then I'll just run them over a scalper basically to get rid of the mog, so like the sticks, the stems, and everything else, and then I'll have a finished sort of seed product, and I'll use that seed for my own use, and I've also sold the seed to other farmers. Very, very, very lucrative. Yeah.
The hairy vetch, the toxic part is the seed.
Yeah, the hairy vetch, the toxic part is the seed. So I'm not feeding just the seeds, I'm feeding the vegetation, right? And you know, when you have a diverse palette, when it's not a monoculture of hairy vetch out there, we can eliminate a lot of those risks for toxicity. Yeah, right, exactly. So in my blends of those big multi-species cover crops, between 6 and 8 pounds of hairy vetch. So fairly high percentage, right? But yeah.
The grain you harvest in your multi-species, what do you do with that? Do you use that for cover crop seed again?
So when I harvest my multi-species for seed, yeah, I have used it for seed. I have sold that whole mixed ratio off to a feedlot guy. He owes me a prime rib, by the way. I haven't got that yet, so I'm just waiting. Yeah. Sort of like a ball of bourbon I'm owed too for a hockey game that I won a bet on with a certain someone from North Carolina. So I'm hoping I can collect when I'm in Kearney, Nebraska. But he's that big Sasquatch that I referenced earlier, likes to make bourbon, Russell Hedrick. He owes me a bottle. So you guys all have to stand up and say, have you paid up your debt to your Canadian friend? Okay. Anyways, next question. Go ahead.
Have you full soil test to track your journey?
Soil test to track my journey.
Start and
Yeah. So the best thing we've done is, so we've been testing soil forever, right? And my dad was one of the first guys to do variable rate soil testing. And it was eye-opening for the ag retailer. They said, well, this is flat ground. Like why is there so much variability? So when that technology first came, we were sort of on the leading edge of that. Now, you know, a lot of guys do the same thing, and we variable rate fertility where we need it. But by having those tests done from such a long period ago, the farm where my wife and I first bought in 99 up the road where our grain bins are, the soil organic matter at that time ranged between 3.5 and 4% soil organic matter. Now we're up to having soil organic matter, so that was 1999, and where we are today, we'll have soil organic matter that would range between 5.5 up to 7.5. Now, it's closer to 5.5 than it is 7.5, but we'll have areas in the field that are, right? But that is basically zero to scant tillage, like virtually none, right, in 20 years. So really paying attention to the detail and using cover crops and good crop rotation and yeah.
Outside of organic matter change, what's the most substantial thing you've seen change in that time?
Water infiltration. Water infiltration. So when I compare our soils, we get a big rain event. I don't see the ponding on our farms that we'll see on some of the neighbors' farms. Like we can take a lot more water. And then like when we were so hot and dry, like we've been in a drought at home literally, and we managed to pick up a miracle rain 2 weeks ago after wheat harvest. And it varied between where I live, 1.7 inches to as high as 3 inches up the road, okay? In that sort of range. But I was already, prior to this rain, I was already seeing wilt coming into some of the commercial managed fields, like the cornfields specifically, burning up from the bottom, and our fields are staying green. So, you know, those contrasting management, you can start to see wilt in soybeans. Like there was physically a field of soybeans that was dropping leaves. That was that dry. And like so if you have a big, say, a tree along the edge of the field and its root mass goes out, it's a big root ball, those plants were dead. And we have one distinct area when they put that 4-lane highway in on our farm, they stripped the topsoil off and the cement plant was right there. Those beans where all that topsoil was mined, this is like decades ago, the 401 went through in the 60s, right? And to this day, you can still see where that imprint was because those beans were shutting down and wilting and you can't do a damn thing about it. So, yeah. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So
Go ahead.
when you were talking about rotating the cattle in the afternoon versus the morning, you think it was more to the higher sugar content or staying away from the dew in the morning?
So I think that the plants were tender, right? And there was enough water content in the plant to cause that green material to start to get foamy and it just capped off. Had the plant been dry later on in the afternoon, as well, it's more highly digestible because it's increased sugars, right? Then I don't think we're going to have the issue. So again, it's me to blame. There's a $2,000 ticket. That was a hard lesson because that calf is worth $2,000 every day, all day, right now in this market. That's a lot of golf for a guy who likes to golf, right? A lot of golf.
We got plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, and I'm around here. I just want to say thank you to Tyrell. This is my therapy, okay? This is my therapy, so thank you for having me.
So we got beer in the back there, guys. There's bottle opener. There's some Second, some Coors Light, and then some cigarettes. So go get your beer and take a break for a few minutes, and then we can do some more Q&A. Just shoot the breeze for a little bit because that's the best part.
I'm on the precipice of trying to make. Pardon? I don't know, but I'm excited to see how it plays out regardless. I'm on the precipice of buying a sprayer. I need to replace the current field sprayer I have. And with the technology that's coming about, whether it's drones or whatever, there's a lot of restrictions at home, sadly, about what we can use drones for presently. In talking to Russell Hedrick, who's sort of been a leader in this space of using drones, the limitation that he was faced with was potentially using manufacturers that were tied to China And then they were saying, okay, well, does this have spyware technology associated with it? All this other crap, right? So this is the world we're living. This is the world we're living in right now. Okay. So I'm excited to see where this technology goes. Can we go to more of a swarm concept where maybe we have more than one drone, but I can cover the same areas maybe more cost effectively? Does a sprayer look like with an electrical platform as opposed to diesel powered? And can it run autonomously without me being there? You know, I had a conversation a few years ago about trying to get ready as 60 is getting closer every year, right? I was 53 in July, knowing that it looks like our kids aren't going to be our successor. I want to find somebody to be a partner on our farm and take over 50% of our land base. I thought I had a young guy that had some livestock last year that could have been a complement to our farm, and in all honesty, it turned into be a bit of a train wreck. But again, was it a failure or was it a learning opportunity, right? It was a learning opportunity in the sense that I need to set in motion more ardent rules of engagement, right, in print. I had too much trust in another person, and it was like a gentleman's agreement about what the expectations were, and clearly what he thought the expectations were and what I conveyed did not resonate. But that's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. So those are the things I'm excited about. How can we engage more people and get more people back to the land? Providing opportunities for non-farmers to see agriculture as a real possibility, as a career choice. I think we need to figure that out, and we need to figure out in a hurry.
So I'm 3 years younger than you, and this technology, what scares me is, can you pay for it in, let's say, 65 is the target age that we want to maybe slow down and retire. So $1.5 million for a sprayer technology, and I pay for that 15 crops. Now we're looking at, you have 15 crops left.
Right.
And this technology you pay for.
And the thing that scares me about that is it going to be like the VCR technology, right? Where not only are we not using a VCR, before when they first came out, it wasn't a VCR, it was a beta. And then the beta became obsolete. Before that, right, we had the 8-track, and then it was replaced by the cassette. So now we no longer have a VCR. We went to DVD, and now we don't even use DVDs because we're streaming everything. So, you know, I don't want to be buying technology for it to be obsolete before I bring it home from the factory. And that's you know, is there a resale value for any of this stuff? Where presently, if you bought a combine, you drove it for 10 years, you still had some sort of salvage value. Well, you know, same thing with a field sprayer. Who knows? Like, I think there's a lot of ambiguity. That's a big word, ambiguity. A lot of uncertainty. Okay. Next question.
So to play off that, what is your exit strategy that you might not have somebody take over that?
So Karen and I, between the two of us, have discussed, like let's face it, our largest capital asset, like I've said, is our land. And the kids, we want the kids to be owners. If they're not going to be farmers, it's simple. They're 50-50 owners. We would like them to have the farms in perpetuity, use them as a hedge against inflation. But we want, and I've articulated, and I keep coaching, do not accept the highest tenant bid. We want to find a sharecropper that can continue to farm the farms in the way in which I'm farming them. Because inevitably, if a guy comes in with tillage, or a girl, and they'll say, wow, I'm getting far better crops than Blake ever did. Well, all they're doing, as you know, they're just burning off all my accumulated carbon, thank you very much, right? And then the kids, they're not benefiting from that at all. And then their asset is just going to decline. So right now we're trying to find, and I'm trying to educate some younger guys in the area about the potential, and I'm sort of subtly making these hints. But that's a struggle, right? Because there's older generations at play that say, you're not going to farm like Blake. Look at he's got a bunch of weedy mess, right?
And I think that education is key because absentee landowners are not.
Yeah. And I, aside from controlling how they manage the land, like as far as no tillage, if they want to use technology as far as seed and everything else, you know, that's something that we'll have to cross that bridge, right? If they're paying for it and they pay all the fixed costs like machinery, seed, and I get 40% of the take home, that's your choice, right? Because normally at home, when I was a tenant, essentially with a landlord, and we worked share crop as a 60-40 split, and I paid all the hard costs, seed, fert, chemical, and he got 40% of the crop with no risk, right? So if the yield was 60 bushel the acre, he got 40% of it for soybeans, right? And if it was 40, he got 40% of it. So he was invested, he was sharing the risk as well. But there's a lot of guys that just want maximum dollars in rent, and then they're just there mining the soil, trying to maximize on every square inch, and they're not invested. Anyways, next question.
Have you had any guys that in the past that watched your operation and maybe started to engage a little bit in terms of, hey, what you do here, how do we start that? And you still kind of like, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, there's an expression, you're never a prophet in your own hometown, right? I get the opportunity to speak all over the world, and very seldom do I get invited to speak at home, tragically. It's still a very tillage-centric mindset, and it's because we have such resilient soils, like naturally resilient, like these silts, these loams. A lot of European immigrants have come our way, so with that, they've brought their latest and greatest tillage-centric mentality. So, when we have the challenging soils that I have, if we till them at an inopportune time, it significantly punishes our yield. Where those guys that have those resilient soils, right, they can do the most excessive forms of tillage, and yet they'll still produce a really awesome crop. It's just not fair, right? But I know what it is. Like, it's just the way it is. And so I have people that are in admiration of what I'm able to grow with the type of soil I have, but my immediate neighbors still think that, doing tillage is a necessity. And I'm like, well, knock your socks off. But when I go into the place like the accountant or the banker, and they start looking at the financial statements and they say, wow, you guys had a really good year. Tragically, there's this thing called a privacy law where they can't say to you, well, John, he didn't have a very good year. He's right beside you. So I know that when the accountants and the bankers start commenting about how we're doing. Years ago, this is another funny story. Yeah.
Interest rate,
Well,
you put more money in the CD. I mean,
it has.
there's a loss between us and the bankers when it comes to
Yeah.
what's good and what's not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they've asked me some questions around those, like how do we reward farmers? I said, well, start with me. Like, show me the money, like Cuba Gooding Jr. and Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. And I can jump through some hoops too, but right now they're not there yet. They're not there. It's a lot of lip service. So this funny story I was going to say to you as it pertains to neighbors. I'm growing a field of hairy vetch, cover crop, and the neighbor lady, in typical neighbor fashion, she comes up to me at the end of the day, and the vetch is out in flower, purple flowers. We're not even grazing it yet. She goes, what are you going to do with that crop there? And I said, well, I'm gonna harvest it for seed. She's like, what are you going to get? And I said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? I said, well, I've never harvested a vetch crop for seed. I said, I've talked to some peers. Oh. I said, well, we're really not making any money in this business of agriculture. Well, she looks over to her husband for verification. Well, we're making money. Well, he's 10 years older than I am, right? He was able to buy his land 10 years before me at a lower price point. He's also had an older generation that's passed away, has inherited some of that land, brought it into his portfolio. So his debt load by comparison is probably much lower than mine. So what I said to her, I said, about that vetch, I said, what I do know is I set the price. She goes, what do you mean you set the price? I said, I set the price. Well, she didn't know what to do, like when I said that to her, like she just couldn't compute, right? And but anyways, that's where we are as it pertains to neighbors, right?
And even if it's not there, there's and give you some leeway, I guess, as an expression, give you enough rope to hang yourself.
Yeah.
And you can put numbers out there, and some numbers, yeah, I can get that up in the weeds. And, okay, you did this one. If you, not spray or something, whatever, you get the spray bill for something, you can see that cost, okay, you've got 3 passes or something out there. Well, I didn't know. Yeah. I guess, I didn't know if you actually experienced time. And
The problem is today with Roundup Ready technology, and I just use Roundup as a generic word, but glyphosate, 2,4-D, whenever we have herbicide resistant technology, whatever the herbicide resistant is, we have become transfixed on aesthetics, how it looks, right? And we don't get paid a dime for aesthetics, not a cent. And now I see all these neighbors that are so worried about weeds that they spend copious amounts of time on the back of a ditch bank mower, going around the farm, chopping weeds, because they're just so hell-bent that that's a problem, right? And I'm like, those things provide a valuable service to your farm for beneficial insects. And like nobody can monetize that. They don't think about that, right? And so they keep going back to the well with the same insecticide, the same fungicide, the same, all of these things. And now you wonder, well, why do we have problems with resistance? And so anyways, there's that old adage as it pertains to numbers too. Figures lie and liars figure. And there's a lot of that goes on today in agriculture. Figures lie and liars figure. And you can skin numbers any way you want to justify an expenditure. I see that and I hear that time and time again. So you had a question here?
Yeah, what is the best soil you ever seen in the world?
The best soil I've ever seen in the world? Oof. Wow. I was in Iowa, and it's hard to beat. There's some pretty nice soil in Iowa. Yeah. So I was just outside of Davenport, Iowa, and then I've been up to like where Lawrence Dunloggy lives there. He's on the Driftless Plains, right, or the Driftless area of Iowa. But I've been all across the state. I was down to sort of where where do they make Blue Bunny ice cream? Where's Blue Bunny ice cream made in Iowa? Anybody know? What's the name of the town? Blue Bunny ice cream. It's down there. There's Lamar, thank you. There's some pretty nice soil down in there, boy. Woo-hoo. And so one of the first talks I ever gave, and I'll ask the audience this question. How many of you guys are still, this is how the question went, how many of you guys in the room are still doing tillage? Put up your hand. I'm not judging anybody. Anybody who's still doing tillage? Okay, so the majority of the room puts up their hands. So it was a nice mix of men and women. Sponsored by the Iowa. No? Why? You can take a boat. You can take a boat. It might take you a little longer. So anyways, I said, the next question on my word was, I said, if I can guarantee you aside from flying, your fear of flying, if I can guarantee you that you can go to Hawaii every year for the rest of your life, would you take me up on my proposal? 100% of the women, arms are up. Yep. I said, all you have to do is convince your husband to stop doing tillage, and I can guarantee you in the diesel fuel savings alone, you can go to Hawaii the rest of your life, every year. And it was like crickets. And that's where we are in agriculture. That's where we are in agriculture. Because people are so reluctant to change. that nothing gets done, right? So some of the nicest soil, Iowa, South America, I've been down there. Argentina's got some nice soil. I was on some farms there, Paraguay. Yeah, Canada at home, we've got some nice soil too, right? Like there's wherever you see any estuary, right? Like all these river deltas, typically those are some nice soils because it's somebody else's loss, right? Somebody else's erosion. The best of the best has ended up somewhere where it's not supposed to be. So those people that farm in those river deltas are farming somebody else's loss. And whether it's the Nile, the Euphrates, the Mississippi, you know, on and on and on it goes, any great river delta, that's where you find the best soils. And that's all due to neglect, right? Tragic as that is. Another question? I'm going to stop talking. Ah, come on. Go ahead.
Explain in your country what role government has in agriculture.
So tragically, because we're less than 1% of the voting population, I'll speak to specifically my province, okay? When we started down the path of no-till in the 80s, the government was reluctant to provide advice for fear of what? Failure, and then who was going to be in the target for potential litigation or loss. And now our litigious system is not nearly as much of a windfall, I'll call it, as what you might have here in the US, right? These big award settlements that you find if you're in the legal system compared to what you get in Canada are very small by comparison, but still nobody wanted to have their career on the line if somebody was to have experienced failure. So they always provided roadblocks. So that was in the 80s. A lot of the government programs, a lot of the government institutions, as it were, the extension offices have been gutted. And they allowed the advice then to start coming from universities, and extension was sort of scaled back. Then they started coming out with and recognizing as Roundup Ready took over public breeding of soybeans specifically, then they started to allow the multinational corporations to set the message, right? And they saw, well, they've got agronomists on retainer, they've got all of this information, right? Monsanto, when they came to bat, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, when Monsanto brought Roundup Ready gene #1 into Ontario, we had years of public research for soybeans specific for our geography in the province of Ontario. Monsanto made them squash and bury all of that germplasm. If they wanted to have access to that trait, that Roundup Ready gene, and they could see, the public breeders could see that the demand for Roundup Ready 1 was just going like wildfire across the prairie, okay? And so they just, they buried all of that public research that was funded by the taxpayer. How tragic is that? Tragic. And so then, again, you know, we don't need this department, And it happens. And I see it, it's tragic, right? We've lost sight of the importance of recognizing that the environment, a good environment, a healthy ecosystem, is for the betterment of the collective, right? There's still too many big dogs waving a big lobby stick out there, which at the end of it's a big wad of cash, right? So it allows people to perpetuate bad practices. There's bad actors that are still polluting, contributing negatively to shared resources, specifically water, and nothing gets done, right? They just keep, in typical politician form, sweeping it under the carpet. Just about the time you get some administration that comes through, right? Some government gets elected that's going to do something positive. It takes them 4 years to get it done, or 5 years, or whatever. And then there's a change of government, and no. You know, you guys, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I've lived underneath the shadow of the US for years. I know how things work over here, but yet I'll never have the opportunity to exercise my vote, right? And I've said this openly, and I'll say this to this audience, I'm not so sure where I would find myself, right? Because I have values for both system. And, but you know, it is what it is, right? I struggle today with where we are in the world and all of the unrest. And I think that the world would be so much better if we could recognize the fact that we all need to survive on this planet. I think the next big wars what they're being fought over is water, and they're being fought over water in real time. Like that's what's going on, whether you want to admit it or not, or whether they want to talk about it in Israel and Hamas and all this stuff. One country controls the other country's water, right? And they're at odds with each other. They've been at odds with each other forever. And we're missing the boat on all this. Nobody's talking about that. And in Canada, when we have such abundant amount of water and people take it for granted, that just frustrates me when there's other people that are just, you know, on death's doorstep because they don't have enough. So, yeah. Any other questions? So thanks again, everybody. I've really enjoyed my time. Terrell, thanks for the opportunity to share my stories. And you know where to find me. You've got my contact information. So have a safe rest of the growing season. Hopefully you continue to get blessed with the rain that you've received so far, and you have a favorable harvest. So thanks again.
Thanks again, Blake. Really appreciate you taking the flight down here. We can make it work out. Big shout out to Shannon, who I came up with these ideas, and you know, so this would not happen without her. Cindy yourself, and she's back.
I wrote them in.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Definitely appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. Especially our different groups that always support us. Different businesses that always never hesitate to say, hey, we'll take care of that. Don't worry about that. So yeah, what happened with all those great people, and what happened how you guys showed up on your t-shirts.